Hello and welcome to Tattvadeep, Conversations and Explorations. For our first episode, I sat down with Dr. Ashna Sen, a mathematician, teacher, and an author of 2 books, The Rusted Trunk and Reimagining Mathematics. She has double majored in physics and mathematics from Mount Holyoke College, USA, and has also obtained an MSc in geophysics from Stanford University. Her interest in innovative mathematics took her to Brockwood Park School, UK, where she helped her students understand how they were naturally wired to interact with math effortlessly. Her latest book, Reimagining Mathematics, is an extension of her belief, as it explores how we need not look at mathematics, but look for it in nature, the arts, music, architecture, and friendship to understand it on a deep, personal level. Replete with memorable examples and insights, the book encourages the reader to acknowledge how math is not limited to the classroom but is present all around us. We talked about her journey with math, and among other things, what would remain of math if we could take away all numbers, theorems, and formulas from it. We hope this conversation can help the listeners see math as something beyond the textbook, beyond the fear, beyond a sense of inadequacy, and see it for its tattva, for the wonderful ways it gives us to look at the world and ourselves. Hi, Ashna.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Disha.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure.
Great.
It's my privilege.
I guess it was a conversation just waiting to happen.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
So I think I'll start with a basic question, something that will kind of warm us into the rest of the conversation. Yeah?
Right. Bilkul. Yes.
Okay. So my first question is this. How was your experience? How was your journey with math as a student and later as you became a teacher?
Right. If I can go back all those years, I feel that I wasn't a mathematician in the making while I was growing up. I was completely in the humanities or focused in the humanities. I loved literature, I loved English, I loved history, and that was one part of me. But at the same time, there was an incident when I was, not an incident really, an experience that put mathematics a little bit in the front burner, which was just the happy chance of being Shakuntala Devi's neighbor while I was growing up in Ironside Road in Calcutta.
Right.
So I knew of numbers and mathematics, and not that mathematics is numbers alone, but I certainly was, I felt a kind of tug towards, just the pyrotechnics of, and the trickery of pure numbers, if you just look at it quite simply. So that was the background, so to speak. But because my mother taught literature for 40 years and my father was in administration, I had a very different sort of template as a background. But I realized that in school, one of the reasons mathematics wasn't a beloved subject was that it's taught in a sort of mechanical way. And although I liked my maths teacher in school, I got the feeling that the whole curriculum was more of a put off, and it was more of a filter. You could hack it or you could. So that I felt was actually the wrong relationship with mathematics. So very early on, I was actually seeking, right through school and through my journey, a better relationship with mathematics. Now, that might sound like an odd word. What do you mean by relationship with mathematics? Is mathematics your friend? But in one sense, that has been my journey, my seeking, as it were. that can there be a relationship with mathematics, as a friend, as something that's so natural, just like language can be, very enjoyable, can be very communicative, very natural. We don't have to, struggle too much. Our mother tongue is so intrinsic. So I really felt that it ought to be a very intrinsic quality, this quality of, I suppose, mathematicos.
Right.
And I also felt that there ought to be, there ought to be a connection with other subjects as well. So this was a long arc right through my school days, but I didn't feel it while I was at school, because kind of mathematics we all do, ICSC, etc. It all follows a certain pathway and a certain curriculum, and it's almost as though you're learning not just language, but something very, a very technical language and a very technological language.
Right.
Felt that there ought to be possibly a much more soft relationship with numbers, with, I suppose, logic, with this kind of analytical thinking. It should come, it should just feel effortless, if effortless is the right word, yeah? Not so, not so sharply, not so difficult, not so effortful, not so rigorous, not so burdensome, eventually becomes a lot of people. And I also felt this whole categorization, if you're either a maths person or not, that was also wrong. So anyway, this was the forward journey, and this was the background to my sort of developing my own relationship with mathematics eventually. So, I started liking mathematics around at a much older age.
Right.
I always had an affinity towards numbers, but I started liking mathematics in that sense much later, and then more and more and more. The more I could unshackle myself, the more I felt that, there was this little avenue opening up, or a little window opening up. So I hope that answers your...
Certainly. I understand the quest. And what I'd like to know is then this quest of yours, once you started to teach, I'm sure that found its way into your teaching also, because you were not happy with what you saw in the way math was taught, and you had a hope that maybe there is a way that math can be made effortless. It can be made likable. Let's say it can be made likable. So in your time as a teacher, how did you bring that about?
Yes, I was also very fortunate, I think, in eventually when I took to teaching, and particularly when I was teaching in school at a Krishnamurti school in England. That's where I got the opportunity to practice what I was preaching to myself, so to speak. This other mathematics. And the reason I got this opportunity is that I was teaching some classes which weren't necessarily leading to exams, so it didn't lead to the A levels.
Right.
So I started, I suppose, with a kind of experimentation there, because I could experiment. And many of the students, they just took that class as a fun class, open-ended. They were expecting the same kind of mathematics that you would teach at, say, the class 10 ICSC or GCSE level.
Right.
I think it's at this point that I started asking myself, can I make something quite interesting? Can I make small modules of mathematics or mathematics that are a little bit off the beaten track and very interesting and somehow connects with everything else? That was the big question also that the students were asking me, that why should we go through all this difficult mathematics, from factorization, leading all the way to calculus, and before that trigonometry. Most people are lost at the level of trigonometry, cosine, sines, what is going on?
Right.
So they said, why do we even use it? So if I don't want to become a mathematician, I'm not going to use any of what you're teaching me. So why should I learn this? So there was this huge resistance.
Yes.
And so the challenge to actually connect, not just connect mathematics, but to see how mathematics is fed by all the other subjects that are seemingly unrelated.
Wow.
And while I was in college, I had come across some very interesting books that helped me make this connection. It was an easy path from then on. So how nature is related to mathematics, how music is related to mathematics, how architecture is related to mathematics.
Wow.
A whole variety of fields have been feeding mathematics. This I started myself.
I mean, that's a revelation in itself, to see that math is directly connected to all these different fields, which we study alongside math in school, but it seems totally disconnected, totally disjointed. Like,
Absolutely.
It allows you to keep that ground under your feet, to know that the connection is there
Yeah.
between math and other fields, and other fields math, and how perhaps it's also organic and it's evolving and it's growing, and we should take advantage of that knowledge. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
what I had in mind was to ask you also, maybe a part of it you've somewhere also answered, that if we take these 3 points of views, three ways of looking from the, let's say, one is the educational system, whether in India or abroad, then and the habits that these educational systems have. I'm calling them habits because they say they're refusing to change. So some habits, some old habits that are taking time to die. Then there is a approach of the teachers as they bring the subject to the class. Then there's an attitude of the students which they bring to the subject. Now, in these three ways, how are these 3 ways contributing in making math difficult? You've answered a bit of it, in some way, but if we have to just break it down in these 3 categories.
Yes, I mean, if we think of, this, one of the big barriers is kind of chopping up subjects and keeping them in their own tracks as though there's no leakage into any other subject. That's how it's set up, right? So that's actually adding to the problem, because you just have, all your knowledge becomes, as if it's in a filing cabinet. It's
not integrated. Not integrated.
Yes. Exactly. And they're not integrated. It's as though the rail track is straight and it doesn't crisscross. So this total disconnection and complete super specialization, if you take one field forward, I think that's also quite unnatural. So the child from the very beginning actually knows that somewhere. And so the older you get, it becomes more and more pronounced. And that is actually the system. So you feel very sort of boxed, within a certain area, and you are taught to become an expert within that area. And there are people, of course, who are experts in several areas, but they're treated as such, as experts in these 3, separated areas. But you don't feel a kind of wholeness or a holistic spirit emerging out of any subject, just in the way it's presented, you see? So I think that's one thing that can be quite off-putting and can lead to, this kind of block that you're talking about. And then I also feel, I'm not trying to, in a way, deride any kind of set curriculum, because that is the way set up for certain jobs. If you want to be if you want to be a civil engineer, it'll move, your knowledge will move in a certain direction. And you're also, then moving towards the construction of all kinds of buildings and bridges and things like that. That requires certain expertise, knowledge of, the elasticity of substances and things like that. So I'm not trying to backtrack from that. But what I'm trying to say is, because you're so boxed in from the very beginning, you're not actually seeing very often the beauty of the connections that will be, because it didn't naturally come about. So if I want to put it in a different way, if children are not, told that, okay, maths begins when you're 6 years old, from class 1, and here's your mathematics book. This is book number 1. It starts here. Then they've already actually started doing mathematics from a very, since their birth or pre-birth. That's what children are not told even, ever,
Right.
So mathematics is a separate artificial subject and is presented as such later on. Whereas just being in part of nature, listening to a gurgling stream or staring at the stars, watching leaves, seeing how ferns, sprout leaves and how intricate they can be, watching a spider spin its web, you see amazing mathematical patterns. You see sacred geometry in nature itself. And fundamentally, if the child is curious, they see this integrated way. Now, this I think is blocked. This is coming to your question. So I hope it sort of there's these 3 areas that you pointed out, that you're blocked. You don't have this natural ab initio.
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is starting with the system, then I'm assuming you mean it both, whether it's in India or anywhere in the world. So anywhere in the world, wherever you have had the chance to teach and experience it firsthand.
Yeah, right. The standard curriculum.
The standard curriculum, right. So you're saying that the way it is designed, it kind of enters the student's life out of nowhere. And, it's kind of thrust upon the child. And just that initial thrusting is often making the child resist something that actually might be something more natural. And maybe there is a natural way to have the child get used to math as being present around him. Is that right? So that this thrust upon the child, this force creates resistance, and then this translates into the attitude of the child, which he or she brings to the class. But what about the approach of the teachers? They're forced to follow the curriculum. But what is it that they're doing or not doing that brings the worst out of what the system is like?
Yes, I think it's sort of it then soon becomes a two-way street. First of all, if you have a very narrow set of, if you have 10 things that you have to teach the children no matter what, everything becomes completing the syllabus. You've got to finish the syllabus. So the teacher also has pressure, right? These 12 topics you have to teach a group of 40 students, regardless of their natural inclination or interest or the potential for interest. It's just a task that you need to complete. It sort of becomes like a recipe book that you need to master. And I think the teacher's pressure for that then makes it difficult for the teacher themselves to develop a relationship with the subject that's outside of this expectation.
Right.
Am I making myself clear?
Absolutely.
So I'm sort of, then it becomes, the teacher is not to be blamed because the teacher has been asked to instruct. The teacher hasn't been asked to educate in the truest sense, if you know what I mean. The difference between instructions, as if, it's a manual that you want the student to master. Manual. I'm putting it very, maybe in a way that's not very polite, but I don't wish to be impolite. I'm just trying to say that this is somehow the structure of how things have been so far.
Right.
And perhaps it's going to take a step back and reimagine things.
Reimagine mathematics. Yeah, we'll get to that, that wonderful book of yours. So, okay. What makes math interesting and what makes it boring? We've covered what makes it difficult in parts, what makes it easier, what makes it interesting and boring.
Yes, I think the interesting parts of mathematics for a lot of children is when you basically notice patterns, you notice unexpected things that click together, a sort of aha effect. Even in the standard way in which we learn mathematics, if you're struggling with a problem and suddenly you just get it, and then you say, oh my God, I've worked on it for so long, and finally it's come together.
Right.
So I think it's very interesting for the child, for the grown-up, or the practicing mathematician. It can happen, this aha effect can happen at any stage. You could be a small child, for solving a problem, or you can be Andrew Weil, who's trying to solve Fermat's last theorem. So it can be at any level, and this glee that happiness, it's actually a very innocent one. It's a very beautiful one. So when things click together and it makes sense, your mathematical problem or whatever problem you have at hand, that is definitely a very that's the pull that mathematics has. It kind of dangles that carrot all the time, because that's very intrinsic in the nature of mathematics, I think.
Right.
When sort of, you're following a certain path, and that path kind of opens to beauty in some sense, to put it poetically. Now, the boring part of mathematics, I suppose, and certainly in my experience, has been sort of very long classes that force you in a way to complete the syllabus or to finish something because you have to take an exam. So when mathematics is taught in that way, particularly when you have lots of little queries and questions where there are large holes in one's understanding, and yet you have to somehow bypass all that and pass your exam, do well in your exam, or do very well in your exam. Then this kind of struggle, which is against the tide, I think that can become boring. And certainly most children, I'd say a vast majority across the world, they get quite bored in school, by the time they're not even in class 10, much before that.
Oh, yeah,
It becomes, and very often maths becomes then your least favorite subject, or not. Favorite is not even a word associated with mathematics.
Yeah, it's a it's downhill once it gets boring. It's totally downhill.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that math in itself is not boring. It is essentially in how it is introduced, and then how that introduction is kind of carried forward, that can make it boring. Right?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you say in its otherwise in every aspect, math is interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I mean, for example, you started mathematics at this age without any agenda, without any curriculum, but just going according to, the next step and the next step, according to how you were enjoying what you were doing. I think at the end of the road, you would learn a lot. You could even self-teach yourself. Or if you had a fellow companion or a fellow mathematician or somebody who was also, like you, wanting to learn from scratch, it could be a brilliant, beautiful journey for its own sake.
Right. Like for me right now, right now it was, I'm able to, the biggest revelation, my own research, and we'll get to that, what it is that I've been researching. What it has made me understand is that it's about ideas, and ideas are not the domain of a mathematician or a biologist or a chemist or a politician. Everyone has the ability to understand, because everyone can listen, everyone can ask the right questions or the wrong questions or whatever. So for me, the fact that math is in the realm of ideas, and this is what I was amazed to see so many people being interviewed like yourself who talk of math like that. And it's like, oh, it's not how we were taught. It's not how I thought it was. So it's the way I thought what math is like kept me away from mathematics. So, okay, no problem. Not my cup of tea for the last 15 years. But for now, yeah, in it being in the realm of ideas, it's just amazing. So, and yeah, one more thing before, if I forget to ask this, I think I'll miss out on something. When you said that even in kids, you see the aha moment. Would you say that a child, let's say, who's 6 years or 7 years old or 5 years old, I don't know at what point we're talking about, but the earliest when they say they'll start learning stuff, they'll say start learning math organically, would they be able to express that aha moment that early? Will they be able to show some recognition of a connection, of seeing some pattern?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even a very, very small child who's maybe playing with buttons of two colors, and you just ask the child to, this actually happened to me when I was very, very small. My mother used to correct her literature papers. She was teaching Urdu, and she had stacks of papers to correct. And I was rolling around as a very small child. And sometimes I would disturb her. So she wanted to occupy me, and she gave me a box of multicolored buttons. And she asked me to separate the brass buttons from that box, buttons. And she thought, oh, my child is going to take a long, long time now. And, occupy her for at least half an hour. And in this process, in this time, I'll finish correcting my scripts. And then I quickly gave her the buttons that she asked for, the brass buttons. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, how did my daughter separate these brass buttons from the rest? Because they were all mixed." But because they were brass buttons, I just took those buttons out instead of separating the buttons like she expected me to do. She expected me to separate all of them into their piles and then give her the brass buttons. Although they were all the same size, but I just actually picked out the ones she had asked for. So that's actually a math process, you see. And once that's accomplished, you've actually done your job. You're smiling at your mother because she did, you did what she asked you to, and you're happy. You're happy to present her the solution. And she's actually unhappy because her purpose was not the solution.
Yeah.
Preoccupied. But here's an example of an aha effect. You might
so
be a very,
early.
very small child. Yeah, and so early you have a mathematical sense, of sorting. That itself is, and no numbers are involved here. So you don't even have to know 8. You just create these buttons, and that's it. You understand quantity. You're like a little bird, perhaps, who's aware of her eggs.
Right. Wow. I think I just had my aha moment. So, okay. So yeah, we were talking about the amount of research I did for this. It was, I knew I had to do a lot of research because I don't have a mathematical background. I mean, the last sum I solved was at least 15 years ago, class 12. That was it, There was certainly not walking down the mathematical road for me. That was clear. So, of course, I could not go and read research papers. They'll be so technical, and I'll be out of it'll be out of my league. But what I did find was, thankfully, because of the times we live in, to access these wonderful interviews on YouTube, a lot of documentaries, books, including yours, Reimagining Mathematics, which was just made me feel about mathematics the way nothing else had made me feel about mathematics before. So that was my experience with your book, Reimagining Mathematics. And of course, some films where math was one way or another a part of the film. So I just immersed myself into, actually, there's no dearth of fodder for me. There was a lot of stuff to look into once I started to, look at these things. So one of the films that made a huge impact was Man Who Knew Infinity. Right. So this beautiful film, beautifully made, about beautiful people and such beautiful things in it to learn. So here is what I'd like to ask you. So the film opens with a quote by Bertrand Russell, philosopher, mathematician. And this is how the quote goes. It goes, "Mathematics, rightly viewed, possesses not only truth, but supreme beauty." Now, what do you think he meant by rightly viewed, and how would you explain the truth and beauty he is referring to? Because clearly that was not how I thought of math ever. Anything but beautiful, anything but true, anything but that. So rightly viewed and truth and supreme beauty. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that basically if you, I suppose like Bertrand Russell, if you are one of those outlier students, let us call them, who, despite the system, can actually carry on and develop this relationship with mathematics, as though mathematics is tugging them forward, and masters this language. And certainly in pure mathematics, it becomes more and more of a complex language. Then the kind of insights and the kind of, insight is the right word. The kind of insights that you can get are sort of little truths or big truths. Now, that might be questionable. What do you mean by truth? It's not just a logical fact. because you're starting very often with axioms, you're
Mm.
assuming things.
Mm.
Then you're rotating and going along and seeing where that leads you.
Mm.
But when this journey itself leads you to a very beautiful place, how do you know it's beauty? Because you feel it within you. It's the kind of beauty, I suppose, and many mathematicians have talked about it. I suppose, when you see maybe the Himalayas for the first time, or you see a very clear night, where you see stars sparkling and twinkling. Certainly in most cities in the world, you can't see anything these days because the night sky is so polluted. But what if you did, you nearly saw Saturn or something, not necessarily, you wouldn't be able to see the rings, but you could certainly see stars and planets.
Yeah.
You suddenly have this sense that's outside of yourself. So it becomes something very poetical. So this is the type of mathematical beauty and mathematical truth, I think, that he's talking about, and therefore viewed in the right way. So what is this viewing in the right way? The viewing of the night sky in the right way is when there is no pollution, when it is quiet, when it is beautiful, when you are perhaps, when you have this relationship, this one-to-one relationship with something that you don't fully understand, with the seen and the unseen. So it's all there, and it's all there, yet it somehow sits in your retina. Just this knowledge gives you a sense of awe, gives you a sense of beauty. So I think that comes about, I think, in the minds and in the heart of many mathematicians, physicists, scientists, and poets, any of us, actually. We can get this feeling, and sometimes, it comes about in a variety. It doesn't have to be just in math.
Yes. And I think you're also saying that, sorry?
Everyone is aware of this feeling because they have had this experience.
Yeah.
The sense of beauty that comes about, when you really feel the truth of something, or when you really feel the tug or the strength of something, that it's so powerful, so compelling, and it's so right, and it just clicks, that you feel it's speaking to you.
Right. Yeah, I think people have had that experience because generally life, in one way or another, it shows us its beauty. And if we manage to catch a glimpse of that beauty, however we viewed it is probably the right way of viewing things. I don't know. So, okay. In the same film, Man Who Knew Infinity, everyone was baffled with Ramanujan's originality and his discoveries, and the effortlessness with which he would approach math, and how math would yield itself to him. So when in one of the scenes, when he's falling sick and he's about to return to India, he's in the hospital, and G.H. Hardy, the British mathematician that he collaborated with and became a really good friend of, he really just wants to know, how do you do it? Hardy asks him, he asks Ramanujan, how do you do it? How does it come to you? And I think his response was something like, my village deity in Namagiri. He was from South India, and he was a devotional, a man of faith, a man of faith. And he said that my God puts it in my mind, puts it on my lips. That's how I get it. So now, as Indians, we and even today in 2021, we do understand matters of faith. Coming from our age, at our age, we tend to take things on face value. There is a lot to be discovered. But we just generally, our first response is, yeah, I get it. You are committed to God. I get it. So now my question is, I mean, what I started to wonder was, do you think Ramanujan's experience says something about the presence of a divine element in mathematics, or would you say that it is just one rare example and we can, it really doesn't constitute, does not give us enough reason to look deeper into it? Is there a divine element?
I think, yes. I mean, it's so beautifully said by you and noticed. I'm thanking you for this question. I personally do feel there's a very strong divine element. and he's very he's very right in saying what he's saying. I don't think he was joking. I don't think he was delusional. I don't think he was, this is purely a figment of his imagination and superstition and all of that. I think Ramanujan was speaking the truth when he said this is what's happening to him. Now it's up to us or up to skeptics to say yay or nay, but that's not his business to convince the other person. But I certainly feel he's captured in whatever manner that he could the divine essence of the divine essence, the kind of truth that's very much there in doing something for its sake, in doing something at this level that takes you up to this level of beauty. There has to be a sacred element, there has to be a mystical element, there has to be a divine element. And it's a bit of a shame that we are so cagey about this in the modern century. Like you've said, in the 21st century, in even this day and age, Indians, even if they don't express it, they get a sense. And I'd say that goes for many Asians and people from many other cultures as well. They sort of quietly, in inverted commas or in brackets, say, yes, we understand what this is. There must be a sacred element. We understand the divine. Getting a sense of the divine, understanding the divine might be very different from being able to explain it or being able to prove it, or being able to even express it in a way that lends itself to the scientific opening up and pairing of everything that we do. Maybe it does not fit in very nicely to this, filing cabinet way of thinking that I was previously talking about. It doesn't fit very evenly into technique, the technical, the technological, or even robotic. But I think it's an absolutely essential element. And we see this across the board throughout all cultures in ancient mathematics, which was no different from worship. And in fact, if I could write a book about mathematics and worship, I would do that.
Oh, please. Wow. Yeah. That will be something.
That it seeded itself during the Zoom talk, so I'll probably have to.
I'm so glad about that. If you could just
talk in that book.
Yeah. Oh my God. So ancient mathematicians. You're talking about way back, the ancient Greeks,
or thousands of years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There was no separation between astrology, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, and worship, and creating altars for sacrifices, and creating, domes in all kinds of astronomical measurements were made to, they were not only linked to harvest times and food, etc., but they were very interrelated, interlinked to the deity, to the temple, to the sense of the divine, to the sense of the, something much greater than you. So what was that? Why was that so? You see it in the shards of pottery in the Indus Valley civilization, for instance. You see that they had a very strong sense of geometry and understanding. Certainly they understood, circles and how circles fitted into constrained areas around, say, the earthen pot or whatever you were looking at. There are many instances of these discoveries, that they've made of shards of pottery, and they have these amazing patterns around them that could be very modern, that could feature in any, in any pattern, even on a wallpaper, for example. So where was this coming from? Why did we separate from this kind of divine mathematics, from sacred mathematics? I mean, even until the other day, there was, sacred geometry, not in the traditional sense of how we understand sacred geometry, but sacred geometry in all Japanese mathematics, in the Edo period, for example. So anytime you made even a new discovery, it would be an offering to the temple. You see, so you would take your mathematical puzzle and sangaku, and you would take it to the the altar of the temple. And it was very interlinked with the temple and with the, with religion, with religare, in a philosophical sense. So why this sudden separation now, and why this very deep hesitancy to talk about the divine, to talk about the sacred, to even question it, to talk about mystical numbers as a whole chapter. Again, I mentioned my book here.
Yeah, I know even about yes, I remember even you have dedicated, I think, one chapter on the architecture and how the mathematical shapes allowed the construction of certain very beautiful religious shrines and places also. So now, as you're talking, I'm also thinking. So when you go to a temple, like you go, and if you like to present something, like we generally in India, we take maybe flowers, we take some betel leaf, we take some, sometimes milk. So the things that we consider, I've never thought about it before, but these are the things we take to the temple. In my family, these were most of the things I saw. So flowers are beautiful, they are natural, there is such grace in them, milk is pure. So these are the kind of things that we take to the temple. So now if you're taking like the Japanese culture in the Edo period, what you were saying, if you're taking something that is purely mathematical, so you see it worthy of being given to something that we don't understand. This is worthy of showing you my gratitude in some way. So that's the divine element that you're talking about.
Yes, and the divine element of also how you came upon the solution to something.
Upon the solution to something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
The question on a box very often, so you have these beautiful wooden carved boxes, which are actually mathematical patterns, that they have from time. And that type of mathematics, again, was quite different from the standard Western mathematics of that time, because somehow Japan was quite isolated during that period, historically. So it had that time to develop its own type of mathematics, which was actually very rich in this, which had the sacred relationship. So very unusual kind of geometry came about, a very different way of thinking. From the outside, you wouldn't even understand what the child is doing if they did that type of mathematics, It's a kind of temple mathematics, temple geometry. So of course, they may lead to the same solution. It may lead to calculus, for example, but it was done in a very different way. The thought process was very different. And I certainly wasn't in that time, or any of us, to know firsthand, but I think this is a very telling.
Okay. I also read the biography of John Nash, the mathematician, which was written by one lady. Her name is Sylvia Nasar. Also, it reads amazing. It's like a novel. And in that, there is a line where, of course, Nash was kind of eccentric when he just started. He was seen as someone who's eccentric and a loner, a genius, but a loner, and keep away from him, or or worship him. But anyway, and he had a way of approaching mathematics too. So in talking about, I think, in reference to his approach, there's a line from the book that I'd like to quote and ask you a question. So it says something like this, quote, "Like other great mathematical intuitionists, George Frederick Bernard Riemann, Jules Henry Poincare, Friedrich Ramanujan, Nash saw the vision first, constructing the laborious proofs afterward." Now this intuition is, so like beauty and truth kept on coming up during my research. Intuition and imagination kept on coming up during my research. Now this was really new for me. So maybe we are integrating, like how you were saying earlier. So what I want to ask you is, how does math influences intuition and imagination, and how does the intuition and imagination in return influence math? And do individuals in the mathematical world, are they divided in an intuitive approach toward math? This is something I noticed with the film Man Who Knew Infinity. G.H. Hardy and the likes were slightly wary of Ramanujan's intuition. So two parts to the question.
Yeah. Very, very beautiful. I mean, a very pertinent question. Intuition must be so much a part of the sort of both higher mathematics and mathematics nearly at every level. Very often we also find that in our day-to-day lives that you somehow know something. There's a gut feeling, and you know something even without proof. You sort of get a sense that this must be true. You know, X must be true, whatever that X is. And the path to X can be quite laborious, can be very complicated, and can be very iffy. It might not even happen. But you still have that intuitive, that very strong sense. I think that's a real thing in mathematics, in physics. And certainly Einstein, when he presented his general theory, before that, he had an intuition about that. He had an intuition about the interchangeability of matter and energy, and differential geometry that he needed to know in order to solve the very question and the solution, and the problem that he eventually solved. That took a very, very long time. So that's a case in point where you have a very strong sense of how things ought to be and how things are actually, maybe in the nature of physics fundamentally. But the proof comes to you much later, and you realize that you don't have all the tools in your bag in order to create that. So you say, well, I might have a 10-year journey or a 15-year journey till I get to that point. You see, that happens a lot, I think, in mathematics, and certainly with the likes of Einstein, it did, and at very high levels, it does.
Wow.
But I think at every level, I want to use this, division, high level and medium level and low level. But I think mathematics as a journey, as a subject, has this element of surprise, but it also suggests to you ahead of time. And then you sort of get the hint, as though you're getting little hints here and there, and they collectively, light the path, as it were, to use an analogy.
Right. And what about mathematicians? Your thoughts about mathematicians being divided in an intuitive approach to math? Is it so?
Yes, very often, the intuitive approach to mathematics is not necessarily needed, certainly in quite complex problems, even in engineering. And here, I mean, I suppose I'll be saying something controversial, but mathematics, I'm trying to say, can be also done quite mathematically, quite mechanically, without thinking about something like intuition or even beauty. So it's not like that has to be the same journey for everyone, and very often it's not. People who somehow survive this sieve of the current system, and do better and better and better, and eventually go on to become luminaries in their field. I'm not saying all of them have the same experience. I don't think. I mean, I haven't myself, been a sort of high-level, heavy-duty mathematician or scientist. I'm more of a teacher and educator. But the mathematicians known very often, some of them have this almost kind of magic wand. They can do this kind of mathematics, both pure mathematics or applied. Again, I'm dividing, of course. But they can do that either very intuitively, and then you get that feeling with that individual person that there's something else going on. They're following the beauty, and some of them can do it very mechanically. So you see it as churning out paper after paper based maybe on a Fortran code that they are tweaking, and they're both very valid journeys. I'm not suppressing one and raising the other, but yes, there can be this, certainly.
That's beautifully put. I understand it. So there is a YouTube channel called Closer to Truth, and in that I saw a short clip of Nobel laureate Roger Penrose,
Right.
Right. And so the interviewer had asked him how accurately does math describe the physical world. So this is what Mr. Penrose said. He said, I'm quoting him here. He said, I think people find it puzzling that something as abstract as mathematical reality describes reality as we understand it. And then he, like it describes it so accurately, people find it very strange. And then he takes the example of a chair. He says, when you look at it, what do you think it's made of? So you will go to the level of fibers and cells. You'll come down to the level of molecules. You'll say these are made of nucleus. There's electrons, there's protons. And at some point, you'll come to a place called quarks. I'm calling it a place. It's like as you go down deeper, quarks is one of the deeper places where you've come to. And then he says, again, I'm quoting him, that at that state, the best you can do is to describe some mathematical structure. A mathematical description of reality is where we are always led, and these equations are fantastically accurate. So my hook in this statement was the word accuracy, precision. So here is what I was wondering. You know that famous saying, know the truth and the truth will set you free, right? Know the truth and the truth will set you free. Now, since mathematicians, of course I'm generalizing here, but I think it's all right for our case. Like if mathematicians can be so close to reality as it is, like if they're sitting on a chair, they know exactly what a chair is made of, for the lack of a better example. Do you think this makes mathematicians more at ease with themselves and the world at large? Because they seem to know that how accurately it works, what it is made of.
Oh my gosh. I mean, these are very deep, actually very philosophical questions. Well done, Disha, for putting all of us on the spot. Yes, these are very, very beautiful, fundamental and philosophical questions that do you feel at ease? I think the answer would be that one is never really at ease because you can't, first of all, know everything. I mean, straight away, Heisenberg says the more you know something accurately, the less you know something else about it. So you might know, its location, but you won't know its velocity that accurately, or vice versa. And certainly one is always uncertain. So you might be certain about a very narrow problem, but you're actually uncertain and foggy about just about everything else.
Right.
About maybe you're studying Yang-Mills theory or instantons, and you become certain about a particular subject, but you become wholly uncertain about some other elements mathematically.
Right.
Or you might be a very good mathematician and you might not understand why life is moving in a certain direction together in general of one's own life.
Yes.
Certainly, I think the mystery is never ending. And one certainly doesn't feel, I've never felt, completely self-assured when I actually, say I solved my PhD problem. I submitted it and it turned out to be quite a very neat problem in the jargon of mathematics, a very neat solution. Do I feel certain about anything? Actually, I don't. I didn't, in fact. Even after submitting my PhD, what I was doing was understanding, what to me at that time was a 300-page problem. So it was a big problem and it was a solution. But I think, if anything, it just opened up more doorways and it certainly made me feel less sure. Because the more you know there is to know, and the more you know that you can't get to everything at all.
Yeah.
But I think this is a beautiful feeling because in a way, the satisfaction was that I had the tools.
Yes.
It's as though you have the tools to know when you need to know. And this is the kind of empowerment I would love any one of us to have.
Yes.
Because you just talking to me, sitting here, doing mathematics at your own pace, you already have a sense of kind of empowerment that if you want to get to the next step, you can do that. If you want to understand patterns, even in the times tables, for example.
Yeah.
Start something very simple. You go back all the way to class 4 or class 5, and you say, okay, well, whatever I was taught then, it was taught so mechanically. Can I look at the same thing and find patterns? And suddenly you find patterns. Going back to your original question regarding, does one feel more assured? You feel, okay, well, I've understood something very deeply. No, I don't think if you're truly a seeker, that if you get to the right answer at the end of, the particular sub-problem that you're working on, you might feel very happy within yourself. You might feel very satisfied that you understood a problem very deeply. Even people who are inventors of whole fields, kickstart, I don't think they can feel that self-assured, Even if you're a string theorist and get to the bottom of something, you're not going to feel that you understand, all of reality. And certainly the laws of physics that might apply to us here might not apply in the center of black holes, for example. So even the laws of physics are not the same everywhere. You can predict and you can calculate, and when that works, it's wonderful. But it's a constant process. So
right. So I think
never
the takeaway is that what you get certainly by doing it is some tools of empowerment, which are then applicable elsewhere in life. Right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do mathematicians cope with math-related anxiety? See, assume where I come from is like when I used to study math in school, there was always it was a book of problems. It was not a book of mathematics. It was a book of problems, and that psychologically does something to you, to look at something like that. English is not a book of problems. That is a book of problems. There was a difference, right? So even before opening the book, there was a trepidation. And now when I look back, because I can think clearly, I know that trepidation had a cause, because I knew that somewhere in that book, I know if I'll start with, say, question 1, maybe I'll get it done. Any differential equation, calculus, whatever. I'll get the first question done. Maybe I can find my way through the second. But somewhere along down the line, I know I'm going to get stuck. So I knew that in that book is a place where I will get stuck and I will not know how to get out of there. So why go there? So my way of dealing with math anxiety was to close the book and make it a problem for future me. So how do mathematicians, because I'm sure they would also, just run into walls sometimes, even the best of mathematicians. How do you deal with the anxiety that comes with it, if that's the right word?
Certainly in the past, how did I deal with the anxiety? Very often, there was no formula. For example, in my PhD problem, I was stuck for, it's the kind of problem that just keeps rolling on and on and on, and you keep working at it for years sometimes. But the actual solution of it, the whole way in which it all fits together, that may come in one night. It may come, I say one night because you're thinking about it for maybe a year or a year and a half, and you've solved some aspects of it, but somehow it's not just knitting together or fitting together. And there may be one glorious night, you wake up in the morning and suddenly the solution is there. That, of course, goes to the beauty that you were talking about earlier. Yes, so this that sort of deals with the anxiety on its own. So the anxiety, I suppose, for practicing mathematicians is always there. The enjoyment might be there, and therefore I say that anxiety is also somehow because we have expectations of the mathematical problems, that gives rise to anxiety. So you have a deadline, you have to finish your PhD, or you have to do a postdoc, or you have to submit a paper, you have something to completely wrap up by this date or by that date. If things were open-ended, I think you wouldn't have anxiety, and it would somehow lead to a different kind of mathematics. It would lead to the kind of mathematics you would submit to a temple. So if you're submitting something to the divine, because you love it, you're submitting something to beloved, do you have anxiety? Of course, you would have probably some anxiety.
Yeah. Some butterflies, but butterflies.
Excitement. But it's a healthy butterfly.
Yeah.
It's lovely,
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
enchanting and charming. But the kind of anxiety that we were worried about, and you and I are probably talking about, including the anxiety at school, it has expectation, it has competition, it has pressure, it has comparison. And I think these elements are the elements to be removed really for good. I really don't believe competition is essential, for innovation, for example. I don't think Einstein was competing with that many people, nor was Ramanujan. He wasn't competing with his neighbor. He was doing something for its sake. So the anxiety question is quite loaded with also the experience and expectation.
Okay. I think my next question, we kind of covered it in a conversation here and there, but perhaps what I'm looking for is, in a mathematical term, a proof. So can you give an example from your life or from the life of someone you've known where you experienced or, experienced the fact that your mathematical way of looking at things pulled you out of a tight situation? It could be anything. But because how mathematics had trained you to think, the tool of empowerment that actually came in handy and took you out of a sticky situation, and you thank math for it.
Yes, I mean, I think because personally, I feel everything is so interrelated. Whether it is the way I cook or the way I measure, there is a certain mathematical and very analytical element in the way I think. So it's kind of pulling me out of trouble probably on a daily basis. Not bank and not just with the banking problems, but very, very often, and quite simply, I think I'm quicker at spotting, even when I go to the market, spotting a discrepancy, and sometimes noticing that there are a wrong number of zeros, that can make all the difference, whether it's a banking problem, whether it's just buying something from the supermarket or rather the market. And very often I have experienced, just going to the sabzi wala, the vegetable vendor, and, saying that, well, this, whereas sometimes they just look at me and smile and say, especially if I've, if they've given me back too much change, then they're actually happy for that. They say, you've overpaid me. So this is what it should have been. Very simple ways in day-to-day, everyday life that happens quite often with me. But even in a larger sense, I'm very good at spotting little discrepancies or something completely unrelated to, seemingly unrelated to maths. If it's, a legal document that I'm reading, I sort of feel I'm doing it very mathematical. Even sentence, comes in a law document. It might be something about renting a property, or it can be something related, a legal document. I'm actually, even though I don't have any experience with law, jurisprudence, etc. Even my family were lawyers, previous generation. But I can read in quite a crisp manner, I think, and the mathematical training comes in handy. So whether it's banking, whether it's jurisprudence, whether it is, noticing the proportions of a room that I've entered, or helping to design something.
So
the one time I was asked to do it.
I want to dwell, a little longer on the crisp. Look a little more crisply. That's what you said, right? In a crisp manner. So this crisp manner, if we had to break it down, like, would you say that you're able to see the intention of the document or the direction of the document? What would you call that crisp manner?
The direction, the mistakes, sometimes simple mistakes that would be, it's almost like I've become a better editor, even if the sentences are all in English. But this mathematical training allows me to scan something quite tightly and see exactly what you said, the intention of the document, or the intention of the first paragraph, whatever I'm reading, that pops up think quite quickly. And that may be an intrinsic quality that helped me do mathematics rather than mathematics helping me understand and unpack.
Either way. And
I see the energy of the subjects, you know, and the lack of it.
Right.
In the
wow. That is so useful right there. Right? Because reading legal documents is another thing people are afraid of. I used to be. But now I understand that you can look at it and see it for what it is without getting bogged down, because somewhere your mind has been trained anyway to deal with tough things, to think in a certain way, you know. Okay.
Or even simply to break something down into such small pieces that it actually spells out the answer to you.
Yeah.
You know, so in fact, going back, it might be useful to kind of mention this here. But even the most difficult mathematics problem is off-putting, certainly at the school level, because, you know, by the time you read it, you're just so confused that you don't know what's going on. But if you break down every sentence and write down the question,
yes,
it actually spits out the answer, really, because we don't know what's being asked, whether it's the legal document or, you know, or a mathematical problem. You actually don't even know the question. So if you understand the question very deeply, very beautifully, that question may be from any aspect of your life.
I agree.
And it's,
I completely agree with that explanation. Yes. So, revealing. Now, if you could take away numbers, equations, formulas, theorems, all of these labels, for the lack of a better word, from mathematics, do you think there is an essence of math that would still remain? And what would that essence be?
Yes, I think that would still, certainly the essence would remain. I think pattern is something that is even outside of formalized mathematics. And pattern is something we all recognize, you know, we all recognize the beauty of, you know, even a simple leaf, as I've mentioned earlier. So pattern in things, whether they're in structure or whether it's in the honeycomb, you know, whether it's in large numbers, large quantities, pattern is something that is very intrinsic to mathematics, and it's quite recognized. You know, it might come in the form of rhythm, even music. And music is so related to mathematics. You know, the tabla, for instance, has certain tal, rhythm. That's a very mathematical. That's in fact straightly mathematical. Out of the Fibonacci sequence, really. And that's a whole chapter in itself. But yes, so you remove all the formulas, you remove that jargon, and you're still left with the essence of mathematics. And isn't that beautiful?
Yes. Certainly. So now I see not only mathematics, but all the subjects that are taught in school and college level. Of course, there is a vast number of new subjects added, especially in today's times with technology coming in. There is a lot of subjects, but I think all of them are in some way like problem-solving tools. A subject is a problem-solving tool. It solves some kind of a problem. Mathematics certainly is a problem-solving tool. And that is known, we know that because of the kind of problems it has solved, because it has made our life so much easier. Like I was listening to one podcast, you know, Marcus du Sautoy, in fact, his is the first quote in your book. Marcus du Sautoy, British mathematician, and he has done this 10 series podcast on the history of mathematics. I found it on Spotify, but I think it's originally a BBC production. So here he was talking about how we would not have the internet if it wasn't for I think Galois or some mathematician, I don't remember his name, some older mathematician who had found something with symmetry or networking, which allowed the internet to come about like 100 years after he had found what he had found. So he had solved a problem in the future, you know, of the future. So
Yes.
my question is,
Yes.
as a problem-solving method or tool, what can math tell us about the nature of problems in general, and perhaps even how to look at problems?
Oh, this is a very interesting story, certainly of Évariste Galois, who was only 19 when he died, actually, at after or during a duel, and he knew he was going to die. There was a political problem, and he got involved in that, and then he was challenged to a duel, and he knew he was going to. He probably had a sense he was going to lose, and all the mathematics that he knew, he just this is the story that goes along, with his story. He wrote basically Galois theory overnight, and that eventually was very instrumental in the development of computer science, internet, etc. Eventually, and so that's a very different. That's a very interesting. It gives this story gives a very good insight into how you can you wouldn't always know how something unravels. It's quite like the butterfly effect. There may be a small effect at one point, but it could give rise to a hurricane or a storm. That's probably there in everything that we do. Everything that we do, like maybe getting inspired by a story or by a person is very much along those lines. So one story or one book can inspire you for your whole life. So if that's in the nature of mathematics, something that you could not predict today, but can become a very important field 100 years later or 200 years, that element, I think, is in everything. So I think that's why it's very important, whether it is politics or whether it is in any subject or any arena of life, to be very careful about what you do, because it can unravel in very curious, unpredictable ways. And the flip side of it is also, if you solve a very important problem, that can somehow lead to several branches of the subject further down the line. And unexpectedness, or this beauty, I suppose, of mathematics, I think can be felt everywhere and can be applied to other subjects. And again, I'm separating subjects, of course, but it can certainly apply to other.
No, but I think the question still remains, like, what can it tell us about the nature of problems? Because it's a problem-solving tool. As a problem-solving tool, because that's what it does on a daily basis.
On a daily basis, yes. I mean, sometimes it's not solving a problem, and certainly, Galois was solving mathematical problems, but he didn't have an end vision necessarily at that point, that this would lead to the internet or something. Surely he wouldn't have any idea.
Okay. I think I need to step in and explain what I meant. Say, for example, if I'm a carpenter, if I'm a carpenter, I'm making furniture all day. So after 10 years, you can ask me about carpentry. You can ask me about how do you deal with this kind of wood, that kind of wood. So the Galois was just an example that I was trying to give. It wasn't so much a part of the question, so sorry about that. But the question is, like, as mathematics in general, of all these years, being seen as a problem-solving tool, because it has been solving problems for so long, different kinds of problems, right? Discovering new problems or whatever. What does it tell us about the nature of problems? Because that's what it's been dealing with. That's been its client, so to speak. So what
what does it suggest about the nature of problem solving itself? Yeah, I mean, first of all, it probably suggests that your question should be very well formed, so that you know what the question is. What are you solving? So from the very beginning, it teaches you a certain kind of discipline. And you can apply this principle anywhere,
right?
So you be on the correct footing. Otherwise, you'll be in all sorts of directions.
Right.
And your axioms, where you started off, that has to be not only well defined, your problem has to be well defined, but it's going to sit on the shoulder of giants, as it were. I'm quoting from someone here. But it needs to sit on firm ground. So the nature of the problem solving is that you've got to define your question. You've got to first, see that there is a problem to be solved. Then proceed systematically, very step by step. And certainly in mathematics and many of the hard sciences, you have a certain technique or you have a certain method. But where does it apply to life in general? And the nature of problem solving in our daily lives is that very often, do we have a problem to solve? That's the first question. So it's always good to step back, and then define the problem. By the time you actually sit with something, and by the time you write it out very clearly and think in this meditative manner with great clarity, the solution, if we are seeking a solution at all, sort of tumbles out. That's, I think, intrinsic in the nature. That's what I'm trying to say. Small children, when they are with nature, they see the problem being solved, by nature. So it certainly it's very good training for all kinds of problem solving in general.
Beautiful.
And so I feel
beautiful. How awesome is that? Is there any difference between doing mathematics and being a mathematician?
Yes. I think a lot of that is jargon, fundamentally, because I think, Disha can become a mathematician in her own right, so I don't like labels, as it were. So being a mathematician has a certain meaning in today's times. That means you are a practicing mathematician, possibly attached to a university or an institute, and you publish papers. So that defines you as a mathematician, or a physicist, or a computer scientist. And very often the three intertwine in many other fields. But if you want to do mathematics, if you want to be a mathematician for yourself, the sky's the limit, and anyone, I think, can be. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to kind of separate from the, what society expects of you as a non-mathematician, and clear that space so that all non-mathematicians, if they wish to, can step into pattern understanding or pattern fitting, or just open their eyes to what numbers can do or what nature can do. And that's the kind of mathematician that I'm actually interested in. So I know that's a twisted way of answering your question.
No. I get it. Awesome. So, what does our world look like through a mathematical lens, and what do we look like, and how can math help us get better?
Right. Again, very fundamental, very philosophical questions. I suppose through a mathematical lens, the world can either look like discrete or a continuum, depending on what kind of, if you're looking at everything in this flow of mathematics, that's maybe the question you're trying to ask. So you're not just doing a job, and finishing the job at 8 a.m. and then becoming the human being that you are, but you're looking at everything mathematically with a questing mind, right? So if you're asking a question, so through a mathematical lens, everything becomes quite, I think, interesting and quite a puzzle. So if you look at your surroundings, and you start seeing patterns, everything becomes much more interesting, I think. And I certainly, through the lens of a mathematician, if I can call myself that, I've certainly become much more observant, just observation in general. So if I look at the sky, I see if birds are forming a V shape and why they are, and why certain birds lead and then suddenly the leaders change and yet they maintain that shape. How do they do that? So certainly across the board in nature, I love to see things mathematically, if I can, pattern-wise, if I can put it that way. So each time I look at a beehive, I look at it very intently. If I look at a dragonfly, I actually look at the wings and see why they have certain patterns and why those patterns are seen elsewhere. You know, so I become very, very curious as a mathematician. If I see a beautiful face such as yours, I become very interested in the symmetry of it. And, you know, why am I drawn to symmetry, for example, whether it's in a cat or, you know, an animal or beetle. So symmetry becomes very important. So I think the lens of a mathematician, the lens of a physicist, lens of a scientist, without the heavy dose of any of these labels as a job, if we are out of that, it's just a lens of curiosity and a lens of questing. So you're questioning and you're curious about everything, and therefore you're actually a participant, a very heavy duty participant in life, because all of life becomes very fascinating.
Right.
You know, one thread leads to the.
Wow. So that's a very interesting life of the mind, basically.
Yes, just that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Does math have an ultimate goal, or does the goal keep reinventing itself with time and new discoveries?
The ultimate goal, is it, you know, finding the secret of everything? I mean, if you asked a standard mathematician or a physicist, they're actually looking for the grand unified theory.
Right.
So they do have a goal, you know, they do have a goal where, you know, the forces of nature, can they combine, you know, and so they're looking for a unified theory. So that's one kind of mathematical quest. So you're asking the question, is there a kind of, you know, to put it in different terms, is there an omega point to mathematics? Is there the end of the road? Yes, certainly it seems that there must be a motivation for many standard, very high level mathematicians to keep doing it for its sake. And I'm thinking of fairly seemingly eccentric ones. Certain mathematicians come to my mind, but there are mathematicians who fit that standard, what should I say, the you know, fit the bill of being, you know, eccentric mathematicians who just keep doing mathematics for its sake for years and years and years and years, you know. Grigory Perelman, who actually rejected some of these big prizes, he's one of them who seems to be doing for its, you know, purely for its sake, for no prize whatsoever. Is very happy rejecting the prizes, but something must be motivating him, the question itself. You know, and sometimes certainly at the highest levels, it's the unsolvability of problems. You know, there's certain problems in mathematics that are very open-ended, and they're huge challenges, and human beings, I think, they love challenge. What is the solution to this? Or is there a solution to this? And generations of people sometimes pursue that, you know, and then it gets unraveled and there are more questions put forth. Sometimes very simple questions last for 500 years and nobody solved it. And, you know, sometimes they have a beautiful, and sometimes they don't have beautiful solutions and they are purely number crunching and big computers solve them. So the end road to the whole of mathematics possibly is the end road to asking simple questions, philosophical questions like who we are, you know, why are we here, what are we doing here? So the end road to that would be to answer some of that. You know, what is infinite, what is finite? Maybe it would at some level merge with philosophy, you know, become philosophical nature, because certainly in the past philosophy was not too separate from mathematics. You know, there was
Gregory Perelman, Russian mathematician. So there is a podcast. It's called the Lex Friedman podcast, and this individual is he's an AI researcher. Now he's a podcaster. So he had some guests over who were telling the same story about Gregory Perelman, and then when he refused the prize money for something, he'd solved something that for years had remained unsolved. So, like a big mystery unraveled, and he could do it. So when he rejected the prize money, he said in response, "I have everything I need." I mean, he rejected it. There is a whole story behind it. Why? Because they started to doubt if he's the one who'd done it, or was it someone else who'd done it. So some story around that. But he's so, for the joy of that question. The question is bigger than
Yes,
any prize that you can give me
exactly.
in return.
Absolutely. For years sometimes, So the motivation might not be the prize at all. You don't know whether you're going to a Fields Medal or a Millennium Prize or anything at the end of it. And yet you continue. So there might be, I suppose here you might say that they're actually in love with the subject.
Yeah.
And can a kind of love which is unconditional and motiveless. And certainly we see that in life sometimes that, that love is quite unconditional when it's in its pure form. So, this love and quest for mathematics sometimes is quite non-motivational. And I'm not saying that motivation is a bad thing. Of course, you may have the motivation or something. Yeah. But even with it, that's beautiful. That's true beauty.
With that, we come to an end of this long, but thank you for indulging me, Ashna. And there was so much beauty and depth to your answers. And I knew I could do that with you because I've heard your interviews before. I've read the book also, but still, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Disha, for being such a wonderful host. Actually, these 2 hours passed for me, no problem. I was just worried about, the viewers and the listeners. But I think, we've managed to take them along in this journey and to join in, the ups and downs and the waves of, our little story here.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you once again for inviting me. I feel truly honored.
That is so lovely, Ashna. And thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you.
My conversation with Dr. Ashna Sen felt liberating, to say the least. She made me think of maths as something doable, likable, even beautiful. It indeed helped me see what math looks like beyond the textbook. I liked what I saw. I hope you did too. Thanks for being here. I'll see you soon with another interesting mind, demystifying another interesting subject. Until then, take care.